Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Each week, we bring you leading experts for a lively discussion on topics related to strategic nuclear deterrence. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, Director of Strategic Programs at the National Strategic Research Institute. The views of the hosts and the guests are their own.
Welcome to another exciting episode of NucleCast. Of course, as always, I am your host, Adam Lowther, and today we have a very special guest. Robyn Hutchins is not only about to complete her PhD in nuclear engineering at Kansas State University, but I also sit on her dissertation committee, so I like her even more. But she is a young lady who, of course, is the epitome of what many across the nuclear enterprise are looking to hire into their organizations, whether it's a lab or whether it's an intel agency or whether it's the Department of Defense or DTRA or one of the many organizations out there that needs bright young people. And so today we thought we would talk with Robyn about what it takes to recruit young folks into the nuclear enterprise, and particularly for her as a young woman, how do we attract these folks and young ladies into the nuclear enterprise, which tends to be, as I well know, an entity that has a lot of old guys. And so with that, welcome into the show, Robyn.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so it's great to have you. As we were talking before the show, you, of course, are almost done with your dissertation. And you've had, over the last few years, you've had a number of internships at a lot of great places. And you're looking whether to go to a more technical field or whether to go into sort of the policy and strategy realm. And so you've got a lot of options. So I want to go back to the very beginning. And I want to ask sort of what got you interested in nuclear engineering, and what could, whether it's weapons labs, whether it's production facilities, whether it's the Department of Defense, DTRA, NNSA, what can they do in particular to bring in a lot, both young folks and young women? What can they do to interest folks in our specific area of interest?
Okay. So how did I start? I think that I had always kind of been interested in science and history, and I wasn't always amazing at math. And so, I kind of was of the mindset when I went to college that I would try engineering with the overwhelming shadow of it's probably going to be too hard, so I'll jump ship and go somewhere else after that. So I kind of started my freshman year with the idea of, I'll just see how this goes. If it goes terribly, I'll just jump out as, at the first exit. And so I kind of progressed on, and then they kind of made me choose a specialty. And so they had a bunch of speakers come in and talk about the field. And when they got to the mechanical engineering specialty, they did, their hour-long presentation. And then the last 30 seconds, they said, and then there's this thing across the hallway that does nuclear stuff. There's a reactor over there. But let me know if you want to talk about mechanical. I was like, wait. I'm like, can we go back and visit that? And so, I met some people, just happened to meet some people. And this woman was telling me, my son's a nuclear engineer. I was like, oh, what does he do? She said, radiation detection. You should meet him. I said, okay. So I met this guy for lunch. And he was saying, I went to the mechanical and nuclear engineering program at Kansas State. I actually worked in this lab. This guy, Douglas McGregor, he's kind of the guru of radiation detection in the United States. You should meet him. I said, okay. So then I went and met him, and he was giving me a rundown of his lab. He said, I think there's a guy in my laboratory, one of my graduate students. He's looking for an undergrad. Are you interested? I said, okay. So I went to his office, and, the guy was just great. And so we just kind of hit it off. And, that was in 2016. And I worked for him until 2019 when I graduated. And then this was the exact office where I did my first interview with him. So once he graduated with his PhD, I took his spot. So that's kind of how I got started and how I ended up here. And so a common factor throughout all of that was just really supportive people that introduced me to people, just built my network and gave me opportunities. So now relating to your question, what can they do to attract people? And I think it's kind of the similar thing of just creating these opportunities and making people feel very welcome and encouraged. Because I think one thing that I really struggled with and that I mentioned in the beginning was this lack of confidence that I wasn't going to make it, but I'll try. And so I think just I had really supportive people all around me that just propelled me, encouraged me, and brought me to the next opportunity.
Do you think that's so my dad's an electrical engineer, and, my parents espoused for me to be an engineer as well. And I said, well, no, geez, I don't want to be an engineer. I want to be a lawyer, or I want to be a stand-up comedian. And I ended up doing neither. But I ended up going into the military. I love politics and I worked on campaigns. And so I ended up getting a PhD in political science. And I will admit, going back to college after having been in the military, I was behind, in sort of in my math skills. And so I too was deterred from, pursuing engineering or geology. I had thought about, at one point I went to Arizona State, so I thought about being a petroleum geologist because I thought, man.
That's so funny because I had the exact same idea. I went to KU and wanted to be a petroleum geologist. That's so funny.
I wanted to travel the world looking for oil. I thought it'd be great. But then I still had to take calculus, and then I was looking at the series of courses ahead of me. I thought, man, I don't know if I'm good enough for that. So this idea of confidence, it's a real one for a lot of folks. And I sort of wonder, do you have any advice? Like if we've got a lot of folks out there that would be like you or me, who are perhaps deterred from the sort of engineering fields that would really benefit the nuclear weapons enterprise and the sort of the deterrence enterprise, is there anything that you would recommend for them to do? How could they better encourage, say, undergraduates or graduate students to sort of persevere, to understand what the potential is if they do persevere, to then go into these really interesting career fields?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny you ask, like, what would you say to this person that came up to you and is just lost and not confident? And I actually had this happen to me at an interview. I went to, how they have for internships, they have a bunch of young people coming all together and it's kind of like a little dinner cocktail hour kind of thing. And I had this young woman come up to me. I was a senior at the time and she was a freshman or a sophomore, and she just looked scared to death being there. It was just a very intimidating environment. And she just walks up to me, don't know her Adam, literally just says, I don't know why I'm here. I don't belong here. Why did they choose me? I don't even know this person, this girl. And I'm just like, put that attitude away. Like, do not tell another person in this room what you just told me. Fake it till you make it. Have this very confident attitude about you. No one knows who you are. Nobody knows if you're 20 or 29. Nobody knows you. Just have this persona about you and just have this mindset that you are the best there is. You are going to work harder than everyone else in this room. You will be the best. And I feel like that will come out when you're doing these interviews, when you are meeting these people, have a very humble approach to it, but also just have this mindset that you will work very hard. You will be the hardest working person in this room and you will outwork every single person in this room. And regardless if you were the smartest or, very mediocre intelligence, I feel as if any hard work that you do will overcome any of those, shortcomings.
Yeah. And so what would you tell? So encouragement is obviously kind of an important thing, both whether it's faculty or, students who are further along in these programs. But what about, so let's say you're at Kansas State. And so, you and I both live close to the Kansas City National Security Complex. And if you were to offer Eric Wallerman, who runs that organization, if you were to offer him advice on how to better recruit, because it's, the challenge is part of it is you can't really, and you've been an intern there, so you know what they do, but you can't necessarily, for a lot of the weapons complex, you can't go into great detail because it's classified what happens and what type of work they will be doing. But it's also, one of the big challenges that we hear about is that for many people, they don't want to go into nuclear weapons work because they have a predisposition, a view of what that work is. And so it may not comport with their, personal values. How would you tell the folks, Eric Wallerman and the KCNSC folks, and then of course this would apply to the rest of the national security and nuclear enterprise, how would you tell them to go out to K-State or KU or UMKC or Nebraska and to sort of encourage these folks, to bring them in, to recruit them, to get them excited about the potential work that they could do?
Yes. So kind of prepping for this whole conversation, I was doing some research. And so according to it's a site called Career Explorer. And so they were talking about surveying 97 women in nuclear engineering, which let me tell you, that's hard to find for them. They surveyed these women and said, what's perturbing you from advancing your career and staying in this field in general? And so they gave women 5 sectors to choose from: salary, job meaningfulness, personality fit, work environment, and skill utilization. The lowest ranking of those 5 that women, said they were least satisfied with was actually job meaningfulness. And so to me, thinking if you're going into these, nuclear complexes, that is extraordinarily important work. And so I remember, like you said, I've been through that process. I remember sitting there after the day of interviews and they played this video, where they were, explaining how impactful the work was. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, like I get to be here. I get to work on this project that is going to, have all of these huge effects and defend our country and defend those abroad who are dependent on our nuclear complex. And I think that job meaningfulness, highlighting that, how meaningful my contribution really was going to be, was just the world to me. So I think maybe capitalizing on the job meaningfulness and the job impact and really explaining to these young people how valuable their contributions will be.
So do you think it would be helpful for, say, labs in NSA, DOD, DTRA to come out to schools and have folks talk to, potential students and potential, and start sort of a pipeline approach and sort of, cause you've worked at a number of labs and you've worked in other organizations. And do you think that that's part of what they need to be doing to try to sort of build this understanding of the importance of it to keep them interested?
Yeah. So, I just think that it's very much, you go to apply for these jobs on an online portal and it just turns into a black box and you have no idea if it's a robot on the other side or if it's an actual human being looking at your resume. And so I think, that's a bit impersonal in a sense, which I understand. There's a bunch of applicants, so you have to, use your resources wisely. But I think, adding that personal factor to that recruitment would, kind of personalize the experience and, once again, have a person communicating their experience and, their love for their job and how meaningful their work actually is to get that young person excited about, I could also have this really meaningful career that's impacting in touching so many different parts of our national security and, not only ours, but around the world.
Yeah. So as you look, because you're about to finish a dissertation, which then opens up an entire world in a career for the next 30 or 40 years, have you thought through yet sort of like what you hope? And let me digress for just a second. You're a little bit different in that, you tend to have guys like me who are sort of focused on policy, strategy, adversary behavior, we're the social scientists. And then you have the engineers and the physicists. And we tend to have very distinct career paths and approaches. Whereas what you've done is, so Kansas State, for many who don't know, has both a master's and a PhD program in security studies. And so you, Robyn, have gone both routes and are doing both the engineering and the security studies route so that you're competent in both. As you look to your future, what are you looking to accomplish? Are you looking to go spend a bunch of time as a practicing engineer, either designing widgets or, doing that type of work? And then, for guys like John Harvey, and for a lot of guys who are physicists, and they'll spend a lot of years at the labs, and then sort of mid to later in their career, they'll go to DC to do policy work, and they'll shift. Are you looking to follow that path, or what kind of path do you envision for yourself?
Yeah, so you allowed me to actually get connected with Mr. Harvey and Dr. Harvey, and we actually had this conversation, and he kind of helped me work through some of this. And so from that conversation, we pretty much concluded that it is really brings a lot of credibility to your name if you build your skills as an engineer. And then one day, if the aspiration is still there, to make that jump over to policy. So obviously I've spent a lot of time with you and learning from you and understanding the nuclear sector from a policy and security standpoint. And, it would be very hard to abandon all that I have learned from you to just go into a straight engineering sector. So ideally, and perhaps this is a cop-out answer, but I wish that I could have the best of both worlds, to where I'm able to very much interact with the engineering and technical folks, and then be able to translate some of that, jargon to people who are less technical, that could then impact policy and, the long term. So that's kind of where I'm looking, is to make that nice connection, and kind of where you've helped me, along with Dr. McGregor, have helped me to, fuse that connection between the two realms. So ideally, that's where I would like to sit, and maybe some days I get to actually go out to the labs and, contribute towards the technical work, because I've spent a lot of time learning about detector systems and all of that, but also kind of getting to influence where they're deployed, or how they're deployed, and conditions and things like that. So perhaps that's a cop-out, but that's my ideal fantasy of what I would be doing.
Okay, so it's time to take a quick break. We're talking to Robyn Hutchins about the future workforce and how do we bring young women into engineering, a male-dominated discipline, of course. And we'll be right back. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. Okay, we're back with Robyn Hutchins. So let me digress for a minute. So I have a 10-year-old, Abby, and Abby has decided, because of course now don't give it away because we're 2 episodes behind on The Bachelor, and Abby and I watch it religiously. And so we haven't seen the Tell-All Night, which we're really looking forward to. We'll probably watch it this evening. And we haven't seen the finale. And so we really think Katie's going to win, but don't tell me if she doesn't. That would be so heartbreaking for both me and Abby, because we love Katie. But Abby has decided she does not want to be a contestant on The Bachelor. I'm very proud of that. She has also decided that she no longer wants to have her own YouTube channel. I'm very proud of that. She was also, and I was okay with this one. She did at one point, and she still may have some desires to be a Mandalorian. This is the way. We used to go out to eat at restaurants, and she would wear her Mandalorian mask during COVID. And as a good Mandalorian, she would not remove her mask to eat. She would eat underneath the mask. This is the way. And so, but she no longer has to wear her Mandalorian mask. And so now she wants to be a rocket scientist. She's quite good at math. She's 3 years ahead in math, so she's very good at it. And she wants to fly satellites, build and fly satellites, and learn, get a PhD in rocket science. So she can, that's something she's interested in. Now, these kind of aspirations obviously change. She's 10. Do you have any recommendations for, dads and moms like me who have aspirations for our little girls, who want them to go into these technical fields and be successful and pursue challenging careers and not be contestants on The Bachelor or social influencers? Any advice for us? Because you're at that point now. You've done this.
Yeah. And so kind of thinking through my mind, gathering, because I assumed this question would come. And so, I've kind of thought about what in my upbringing, not that it at all, was the key to ensuring your child ends up to be, an engineer or whatever. But, I was thinking through my childhood and the path that I had taken with my family. And so one thing that really stuck out was that growing up, I was pretty close with my father, and, I was the typical daddy's girl. And so, we grew up on a ranch and had lots of land, and we had woods and everything. And, there was a little neighbor girl up the street. She had the exact same, environment. And we were both always outside. We were always fixing our bikes with our dads. I got tired one time of having training wheels on my bicycle, and my dad had, the night before he went to work, he had shown me how to use the wrench and everything and everything to get it off. And so my mom let us go have our outdoor playtime. She comes out, and I had taken all the tools out of the toolbox and removed all of my training wheels and was riding up and down the sidewalk as fast as I could. So I think kind of that mentality of breaking down this culture of, let dad fix your bike. Dad will fix your bike. You go inside with mom, and I'll have it ready for you when you're done, princess. I think the idea of come outside with me. Let me show you why you need a bike chain, why, how to remove your tires and how to fix them, how to grease them, everything like that. So I think kind of breaking down that idea of these cultural norms of, it's appropriate for me to teach my son to do this, but not my daughter. And so I think that encouraging both of, your children, whether they're boys or girls, to, be self-sufficient, be able to, enjoy walks out in nature and, it's okay to get dirty kind of idea, versus trying to always stay clean and, be able to actually enjoy yourself, learn about the world. And so kind of thinking about how we had that upbringing. I look at it today, my old neighbor, my childhood best friend, she's also a civil engineer working on environmental engineering. She went to K-State too. We bumped into each other one day in the atrium. We're like, oh, you're here. So that was kind of an awakening moment of we had the exact same upbringing, kind of same mentality of ways that we were raised, and we both kind of ended up in the same place. So odd, but interesting. So that's kind of my take. Not that I have any children of my own to speak on.
Sure. Well, I mean, you're still young, so.
Yep, we'll get there.
Now, as you think about, graduating and moving into a career, most of the sort of the, within the nuclear enterprise, it's, the average age is at the labs, it's, in the mid to late 50s, across DOD. I'm 47 and I'm on the young side. And so it's got quite a bit of, it's an older crowd. And so many of the sort of the managers that you will work for will be older men. Do you have any advice for them on how to mentor, folks like you, younger people in their 20s? And is there any difference in mentoring a young woman versus a young man? Or are they pretty much the same? Do you have any advice for everybody to, as they try to, because, we want to recruit talent. We want the best people regardless of, age, gender, whatever. And then we want them to come. And then one of the things that was brought up at the Deterrence Summit 3 or 4 weeks ago was that we're doing a pretty good job of recruiting young people, but then they have a tendency to leave after a few years. So this retention issue is a big one. What would you say to folks in terms of how do we retain talent and mentor, young folks and keep them interested?
Yes. So there was a study performed by the Nuclear Energy Agency. And so they once again asked these women, pinpointing exactly, selected from the survey, what are the reasons why you're not staying in the nuclear industry? And so one of the top answers that 40% of the respondents identify with was lack of women or women leaders. And so, not that I necessarily identify with that, but I think that, if you're a young woman or a young person in general, and, you want to understand how to approach a problem, or, you want to be mentored, sometimes it's easier to approach a person that you identify with.
Sure, yeah.
Or that emulates you in a sense.
Sure.
You're like, okay, well, they've gone through this themselves. They understand the problem intimately. I'd feel more comfortable approaching them. And so that maybe is where I could identify with that 40% answer. But I think this just kind of evolves with time as our society becomes more inclusive of women and it becomes more socially acceptable with these generations coming through of women being in the workplace, women having these management type roles will just naturally evolve higher in the food chain. And I think that once they do get there, taking the time and remembering, keeping that in your mind, if I was once that person who, was starting out engineer one, making an intentional effort to mentor them if they are looking for that. And so I think from the current perspective of having this, as you pointed out, the older male managers that are currently looking to recruit this younger talent, female, I think not making them feel like they don't belong in a sense, but being very welcoming. Sometimes there's some stereotypes that can come out, and just making everyone feel very welcome and like they deserve to be there, and just giving them the respect they deserve. I think that would just be overall very productive to making women and young people in general feel very welcomed in their environment and encourage them to stay longer.
Yeah. So one of the sort of the knocks on the millennial generation is that they want to advance very rapidly. Do you see that as being true? And is it something that, because across the enterprise, whenever I was stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base and worked with Sandia folks, I had met some of the engineers that had worked on a very specific system and a very specific component of that system for a career. And so while salaries may go up over time, it was this career devotion to a very narrow, a critical component for safety purposes. But it wasn't you come in and 10 years later, you're, the associate lab director. Do you see that as something that is true, or do you see just, hey, if you give me really meaningful work and then, I can pay the bills and take care of a family, then, I'm good to go. How do you see the dynamic of all of that working? Sort of those personal incentives, I guess.
Yes. And so, your mentioning of the millennials being very ambitious, almost to an entitled standpoint or kind of realm. I currently am teaching, so I have experienced that sense of entitlement to an extent with students. But, I think that keeping the idea that everyone's unique, not only in their management styles, I think I missed that part of the question earlier. You're saying is mentoring or managing a female versus male different? I think that everyone's unique in their management styles as well as their ambitions. And so I think that initially coming into the workplace and saying, what are your goals? What do you need from me? Is just a huge conversation that I'm looking to have with my future employer. So that, we're both kind of giving a give and take there of I'm getting what I need. They get what they need kind of from the relationship.
So clarity of expectations is key.
Yeah. And everyone just having really clear communication lines of you did not meet the performance criteria. Here's why, as well as, this is what I expect from my mentor or my manager. And so I think that having that clear line of communication and everything is one of the stepping stones to be able to have that career advancement, and having someone, that manager, like personally invested in you and saying, okay, I know that your ambition in the next 5 years is to reach this manager level. Here's how this is actually what you want to be doing, here's my plan, and this is how I want to get you there. So I think having, once again, that personal investment is key. And I think that if somebody, in my position comes in and has, this career ambition that I want to be at this point in my career by this point time, communicating those expectations to your mentor or to your manager, whoever that might be, and having them say, okay, here are the stepping stones. Here's how I can support you doing that. And here's what you need to do on your end to get there. And I think that might curb some of those entitled, unrealistic expectations.
So we are, we're running out of time and we're at the end of the show. But if you were to leave both young people and, senior leaders across the nuclear enterprise with some advice, what advice would you give them? What would be your big takeaway?
I think that from the younger person point of view, I think building your network, and just being willing to put yourself in those uncomfortable positions, because I think the only way that you grow and become better is by growing from that uncomfortableness and embracing it. I think from the other perspective is giving young folks the opportunity to put themselves in those uncomfortable positions and then helping them grow out of it. But I think it's just about embracing opportunity, presenting opportunity, and building those networks and allowing everyone to mutually benefit from those relationships.
All right. Well, with that, Robyn Hutchins, thanks for joining us on NucleCast, and I want to thank the listeners as well. Robyn, it was a pleasure. I hope the listeners, many of whom are senior in the enterprise, will listen to this episode and will take away some useful points that they can then implement in their own organizations. But thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thanks. That's another great episode, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of NucleCast. So we just talked to Robyn Hutchins about what it is to be a young woman moving into the nuclear enterprise, and of course, how do you recruit and retain talent? And I thought her advice is pretty reasonable stuff. It's things that we can all do to try to mentor, that idea of that she mentioned early on, that of a lack of confidence in being able to achieve, a nuclear engineering degree, the very kinds of engineers and physicists that we need. And so helping them with building confidence. And then this idea that the job I'm doing has a purpose, which I know it's important to me. And so it would make sense that it's important to women across the nuclear enterprise. And so those were just some good, solid advice that I think we can all, if we remember, will help us to recruit and retain the talent we need.
This has been a production of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Crumbaugh. Follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast. Listen, follow, and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.